Last Kahoot, you guys.
I'm feeling really good about this lobby.
I like the username, the last one for real.
I know. All right, here we go. Yeah, 10 questions. Authentication asks, do we know you? And authorization asks, what permissions do you have? Is that true or false? That's true. Good job. Donuts in the lead. Donuts. Which is not true about a user session? Yeah, I realize that's tricky. Yeah, session is not a key value pair. It actually is a pretty big object with a lot of stuff, including the user ID. There is a key value pair that holds the session ID, but let's go to the next question. Last one for real. Which is not true about a cookie? Yeah, good. It lives in the browser. All right, Brad's in the lead. What is a DTO?
I feel like I only know this because there was a chat about it in Slack.
Yes, it's a bag of holding.
It is.
Because I remember thinking in retail and fast food going, drive-through order? What?
That's where mine goes too, but
I'm glad bag of holding came up for everybody in the class here.
Yeah. Yes, it is a way to bundle multiple pieces of data together, and it's a class, actually. Okay. All right, Brad retains lead. True or false, a password should be stored in a database immediately after receiving it from the register form. False, good. Yeah, we are gonna hash that password before we store it in the database. All right, Brad's on fire, apparently. Multi-select, which are true of encrypting a password with a hash function like bcrypt before storing it in a database? Good. Yeah, you guys got it. All right. Another multi-select. What is the custom query method added to the body of user repository to aid in looking up a user? Okay, this should not be a multi-select. I must have made a mistake. Only one of these is correct. I even checked this quiz like half an hour ago. Oh, sorry.
Carrie, you get a pass. You made it all the way to the last lecture before you had any issues. So you're good.
Yeah,
You're golden.
the first one is the correct one, find by username. The username is what the user gives us in the form. So that's how we need to look it up. Yeah, and okay. So it says this is the only one. I wonder why it said it was a multi-select. That's weird. Okay. All right, puzzle. What is the ideal order for the logic in the post handler for a registration form? Okay, yeah. So first thing we always do is just check for the validation errors that come from, things like not null or size or things like that that are in the models themselves, or in this case, in the registration form DTO. And then, if the username's already in the database, then there's no point in continuing because they can't register the same username. And then you want to check, does password equal verify password? And then, of course, once we get past all of those things and we determine there are no errors, we are good to go. The last thing is to create the user, save the user in the database, start a session, and route to the homepage or wherever you want to send them. Okay. Donuts in the lead again. All right. Writing a pre-handle method and defining a whitelist are all that's needed to put an authentication filter in place. True or false? False, yeah. Creating the filter and defining those things does not actually activate it. You have to register it by writing a configuration class and making sure that it is registered as an interceptor so it can catch those requests before they go to the handlers. All right. Last question. Multi-select. Which of the following routes for the Tech Job Studio exercise should be whitelisted? Yeah, okay, so yeah, most of you knew that add was not the right one since that's a thing obviously someone would do behind the scenes. The tricky one is just the root slash. And the reason you wouldn't do that is because the way that we set that whitelist up to work is the logic is just checking if the path that comes in on the request is actually starts with whatever that is. So if it starts with /, that means anything goes. So you've just opened up the entire site, right? So you don't want to whitelist /, you want to be more specific than that. And you may remember when I did my exercise, that's why I handled that differently with different logic and didn't include it in the whitelist. All right, Burger Bert in 3rd place. Brad in 2nd place. And Donuts. Nice job. Amy and the last, last one for real. Okay, nice job, guys. Leave. Okay. Colin, you have announcements still, or did you already do them?
I did, but I would like to repeat them since there are quite a few more people.
All right.
Cool. First of all, actually, I wanted to say we have a few days remaining until the deadline for Unit 4, Assignment 4, Unit 2. And everybody who made it here so far, you've come such a far way. So I definitely urge those of you who are in crunch time, reach out to TAs. Keep going. We're almost through this. And then for Unit 3, you'll have quite a bit more freedom, which will be nice for some people, although it's a little bit daunting when you have that much flexibility. But I hope everybody takes a moment to reflect on all you've learned over the past few months. We started in September. Well, y'all started in September. I started a little bit afterwards, and it's just a lot to take in. So definitely give yourself a moment to recognize all that's been required of you, particularly people who are working full-time jobs or caretaking or both while doing this. It's just an insurmountable or almost insurmountable feat. And we're nearly at the end. So congratulations. And I hope everybody here finishes strong. Let me know if you need anything. And yeah. Ben, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Colin, for the graduation thing next week, I know in person obviously is limited, but can we invite as many people as we want virtually to watch?
That's a good question. I don't see why not. It's going to be the hybrid portion of it is going to be open mic. So I don't see any reason why not. Yeah, gonna hand out the password and all the Zoom information then. And that segues brilliantly into, if you are attending that, please fill out the survey that I posted in announcements. It is a 1-question survey. If you're attending, all it's asking is if you're attending virtually or if you're attending in person. As mentioned, if you're attending in person, I just ask that we cap out on 1 guest per student. Because of the space available, we're going to be having to get into a smaller room. So if there are a whole bunch of people showing up in person, then it'll be difficult to get the hybrid element right, because we want to be able to talk to everybody, because I imagine quite a few people won't be able to show up in person. And then after the technical portion complete, event, ceremony, graduation, whatever you want to call it. You can invite whoever you want to Urban Chestnut, is I think where we're planning on meeting after that, if anybody would like to meet there. I'm certainly open to ideas. It's just going to be a very informal, casual get together after that. And yeah, my last announcement is liftoff. So filling out the liftoff survey, which is right above the other survey. They're two very, very short surveys. So ensure that you get those completed. I think we're still missing, last I checked, 30 or so people for the liftoff survey. So we need to get that completed before the end of the week. And that's all I have. Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely. All right, you guys ready to talk about REST? Let me get my screen shared again. And yes. All right. We are talking about REST, which has everything to do with APIs, which is going to be super helpful for going into liftoff. So Colin did announcements. I think what I have on my slides is exactly what he just said. So we'll do the lecture. I actually have a little demo for you as part of lecture to show you what it looks like to wire up an Angular front end with a Spring Boot backend. And then for Studio, you just have graded assignment work. You can go in and demo things for your TA, just work on things, try to get it knocked out since the deadline is Thursday. Okay. Yeah, so there's the stuff that Colin just said. Okay, so we're talking about stateless systems. So we'll talk about REST and statelessness, talk about what resources are, the kind of difference between URIs and URLs, do a little bit of review of the HTTP stuff that you guys learned in Unit 1 when you first learned about that stuff. And then I will kind of talk about, a simple way to create a RESTful API in Spring Boot, one of many ways to do it, but I'll just kind of show you a few little things and then give you a demonstration. Okay, so REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And the idea is that you have two systems that operate completely independently of one another. They're two different applications. And it might be, like a front end and a back end. It might just be like two different back end systems talking to each other. There can be multiple levels or layers. But if they operate independently and they just need to communicate, we say that they're RESTful. And neither of them really needs to know exactly what the state is of the other one at any given point in time. They just, need to have a way that they can communicate regardless of what's going on. So you set up a RESTful API on your back end, and then another system can kind of access the data just anytime it wants. And there's protocols in place to handle that. So when we talk about resources, we're basically saying, any data that can be requested and retrieved is considered a resource. And its format needs to be independent of both systems because, you can have a lot of different systems in different languages and frameworks, right? So we typically use JSON or XML or sometimes HTML. It gives it a way to structure the data so that it can be, quickly transformed on the other end, one way or another. So a URI, that stands for Unique Resource Identifier. And a URL is just one of several types of URIs. And when you're talking about RESTful APIs, that URL has a path as part of it, and that's the identifier for the resource. So we looked at this a little bit. This is a little more in depth than what we looked at in Unit 1. But you remember, scheme comes first, right? And then you might have something like this in front of the host and the port. But then you have the path. That's how you identify the resource. You might have query parameters. You might have a fragment. But that path right there is the REST resource, which we also, talk about sometimes as an endpoint. We've used that terminology before in this unit. And of course, clients and servers, just a reminder, when we use the word client, we're just basically talking about anything that someone can use to make some sort of request and receive that resource. Often it is, a browser, but it can be, can be CLI, it can be lots of things. A server is what provides the resource. So the client sending the request, the server sends the response. You've seen this in action before when we were doing like, fetching from public APIs for, for JSON, yes, to learn about JSON for some of the things that you were doing when we were working in the DOM. So, now you've been working this MVC model, and now we're going to kind of talk again about what happens when you have two completely separate systems. Both requests and responses can have headers and a body. We went into some detail about that. And there was some good stuff in the reading that you had in Canvas, the links for the reading that get into a lot of good detail about that if you want to know more about the different types of headers. I'm not going to spend any time on that tonight because there's plenty out there for you to read. And I'm going to focus kind of more on the big picture and some other details. So request methods, of course, get is for retrieving information. It corresponds to the R in CRUD. Post is for sending information to create new data. That's the C in CRUD. Put is for updating existing information, and that's the U in CRUD. And then, of course, delete is delete for removing data from the server. So that's how those HTTP requests correspond with the CRUD operations that are done in a database through your repository files. And then, of course, the response codes that can kind of come back from the back end. There's these different categories: informational, successful, redirection, some sort of client error. And then there's the other side of that, the server error. And that generally, what those are can really help somebody on the request end figure out, especially if they're doing something wrong. I mean, if it's a 500 error, it means there's something wrong in the back end. But there can also be a wide variety of client errors that we have to figure out what we're doing wrong because we're not using the resource properly, and how well that's defined. On the back end, you can define a bunch of different very specific errors that will help someone narrow down what the issue is. That can be important. And same with 500 errors for that matter. Okay. So creating a RESTful API in Spring Boot. At minimum, you're going to want to have some sort of controller class for like an API controller. So you have an API endpoint. And you want to use this annotation REST controller instead of controller. And what it really does is just combine controller and response body. Now, if you remember response body, this is the first annotation we used with our handlers when you were first learning about this, because we were just sending back text and HTML, right? Because we weren't using templates yet. We hadn't learned Timeleaf yet. So response body gets bundled in with this, but the difference is we're still sending, essentially stringified data, and we're definitely not using templates because we're just returning data. We're just basically saying, we're getting it from the database and we're passing it on to you. That's all we're doing. So this REST controller will do that. It sets it up to kind of make that possible to where someone can make that request at any time. It can go get it, and it has nothing to do with the rest of whatever your application may hold on the back end. So of course, you want to auto wire any repositories you need to do that like you normally would. And that data is automatically serialized, meaning it gets put into bytes, so it can be transmitted as a string and then interpreted on the other end and turned back into objects. This thing of CORS policy, I may have mentioned this before, cross-origin resource sharing. So this exists to kind of allow you to define and allow what systems can communicate with each other, because the browser will actually not let it happen essentially, unless you, say it's okay. And that's, for safety reasons. You don't want just anybody reaching out and grabbing stuff if you're not okay with them doing it. So you usually have to have some things in place. I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like. This cross-origin annotation can go on the class level, and you can give it some parameters. So origins can be set to like a specific URL where that's okay. It's possible to use the wildcard asterisk. Not recommended, but it's possible just to say, anybody can, just to say, stop giving me CORS errors. I want this to work. But if possible, it's better to specify. one way or another. Max age is something that defaults to 1.8 seconds. If there's any reason why you feel like you need a little bit longer for it to be able to process everything, you can increase that. I think in my project, I've got it set to 3,600 instead of 1,800. And then in the handler methods, you set them up like you normally would. But when we were first doing this, before we were turning templates, and even while we have been turning templates, we have always set the return type of our handlers to be a string, right? Because this controller can actually like automatically handle like the way that it bundles up that data and sends it. You can just kind of use your class type. Like if you have an artwork and you're sending just one artwork object, you could just type it as, return type of artwork. But this response entity type actually is really helpful because it gives you a way to actually specify like a specific message that you want to send or specific data in a specific object format, like as the body. The status, you can tap into this HTTP status class or interface, can't remember which interface, I think. And it's got all of these constants that are correspond with all these different kind of standard response codes. Not found would be the one for 404. And so, if you look at this example, and go back, I've got, I'm basically saying there's some kind of response entity. I'm pulling in an ID so that I can go find the specific artwork that I want by ID. And I'm just going to use this optional, check and make sure something's there. And if it is, I'll return it and I will say that the status is okay. That's a 200 response. Otherwise, I'm going to just return, not found. And probably if I was being nice, I would put some sort of little message with that too. But at minimum, you give the status and, it'll return a 404. And then of course, on your front end, you would want to find a way to deal with that. So meanwhile, in your models, you may have to actually put some annotations on some of your fields, because with JSON, when you have more complex data structures and nested objects, and particularly when there are one-to-many or many-to-many relationships, you sometimes have to prevent infinite loops because of that whole idea that artworks knows, has a styles field, and style has an artworks field, because they both have lists about each other because there are many relationships. And the problem is it'll go back and forth, and you end up with this, crazy error and all this crazy data. So there's these two annotations. One is called JSON managed reference that you can put like in this example in the artwork class, and I'm using artist in this case because this is a many-to-one and it needed it to say artist is the field that I'm managing. I definitely want you to send the artist along with the artwork data. But then over in the artist class, you have to say this is the back reference. And so it'll ignore it. And so then it keeps it from doing that looping thing between the two. So that comes into play. There's also, sometimes you have things you want to be ignored. In my case, it was like a couple of methods, like instance methods that I had in the Java classes that I actually wanted to handle differently on the front end. So I just said, ignore these. And then when it comes to authentication, if you have some kind of basic authentication in place with a whitelist, like we did, obviously you have to whitelist that API root path in order for those calls to be processed by these handlers you've just written. On the other hand, if you're using Spring Security, everything's different, and there's a lot more that goes on here. And obviously, we're not going to go into that tonight, but it gets a lot more complex. And because you're dealing with both the authentication and authorization, and user roles and all that kind of stuff. And there's quite a lot more that goes into the handlers, and there's more that goes into kind of what you have to do in your models to a certain extent. So this is kind of the basics of it. I just wanted to hit some highlights of it, but what I really want to do is show you. So, so I've got my same old database. that has, you know, my table of artists. And we have a new artist, by the way. James joined the ranks. Got some stuff to show you. And then, of course, you know, I've got my details, my styles, the artworks themselves, and then the artwork styles table that links those together with the many-to-many relationship. So that's all there. It's all updated. We're good to go. Then I have my backend. So I've done everything that I just told you about. So let me start in the controller. Okay, so I set up a controller. I created an API folder because, I mean, ideally, it's possible that you'd end up having multiple controllers if you wanted to have, you know, just return the list of artists, just return the list of styles, or other things that are going on if it got more complex. So I created a kind of a directory here, but the API artwork controller is what I have, and it corresponds to the endpoint /API/artworks. So this is what you would want to hit: localhost 8080 /API/artworks, right? And I've added that REST controller annotation to indicate that this is meant to have response bodies and be a controller. And then I added that cross origin annotation to take care of the cores stuff. So I've said I want my origins to be localhost 4200 because that's the port that Angular runs on, and that's where I'm going to be making my calls from. And then I gave it a max age of 3600 extra room. Okay. I have auto wired my artwork repository so I can use it. And then I just have Git mapping for two different endpoints. I've got get artworks, so I can get the full list of artworks. And I've got the one I showed you before, which is for a specific ID to look up just that one using the path parameter. So, you know, it looks as you would expect it to. You know, you get the artworks out, and in this case, I just cast it because I know there's always going to be something there. And then I return it with this response entity and just say, okay, let me give you the artworks and give you the 200 status. And of course, this is very simplified. It's under the assumption that there's always artworks there and there's never going to be a problem. Because all we're doing is just saying, give me everything that's there, right? Here, we're looking for specific ID. So this is where we want to use an optional because maybe it's an ID that doesn't exist anymore, or maybe there just isn't, you know, an artwork associated with it for some reason. So we're going to, check it, just make sure it's there. And if it is, we will get it out of the optional and return it with an okay. Otherwise, we return this 404. So that's, this all should look fairly normal with the exception of this new idea of using this response entity to kind of bundle together the response information to send it back. But, this creates the JSON. I mean, this just does it. It automatically does it. So it's pretty cool. But in order to make that work properly, because I did have some infinite loops and things, I did go over and add the JSON managed reference to both artist and styles because they had many-to-one and many-to-many relationships. And I also put a JSON ignore on this get formatted styles because I wrote it differently on the front end. And in style class, I did the JSON back reference on the list of artworks so that prevents that loop. And in the artist class, same thing, JSON back reference to prevent that loop because artworks is in here. And then on artwork details, the only thing I did was add JSON ignore to the get dimensions because I also handled that differently on the front end. Like this does not format nicely if you just send it as is. And then the last thing was to come over here into my whitelist and just add in API as a root path that will, anything that is preceded by API will always be allowed because that's public. So that was pretty much all I needed to do to set up a RESTful API with my application on the back end. And so something that you might not have wrapped your head around yet is I can have my cake and eat it too, right? Because I still have my application, localhost 8080 that has my admin portal where I can go and log in. That's all still running at 8080 because I have all these other controllers that handle all of that for, and correspond to all of these templates and all that. So that's all going on. But I'm using my application also to make some of that data publicly available through this API controller. And that's where I can go to localhost. It always brings up the one you used the most recently, and I haven't used this one for a while. So here we go. And I have a front end, and it takes a while to load because I did not make the pictures smaller, and I should have before I stored them on Google. So the problem is, of course, that even though I have a single page app, these are Google links, so they are going to have to reload every single time, and some of them are really big. But anyway, I've got this nice masonry layout with these cards, and you can see some of the new stuff. So we can go to, a details page and get some information about it. Little link here to go back. There again, yeah, I should have made them smaller and it would load so fast you wouldn't know the difference. But I failed to, my bad. Yeah, Northern Lights. I love the Northern Lights. So there's, I've got this whole app up here going on and using the data from localhost 8080 because I fetched it. So I will show you that side of things too, but are there any questions about what I did with the back end before I show you the stuff on the front end? Oh, out of water. No? Okie dokie. All right, so let's take a look at this. I set up, okay, I'm going to close some of these so you can kind of see what's going on here. I set up an Angular app and it has all the, the standard stuff. It's got the index page where pretty much all I did was put in like my Google fonts and, the CDN links for Bootstrap. And then I've got some, custom CSS in the styles.css file, so they're global. And then the app component HTML file has app header, and then you'll see this thing router outlet. So this is something you guys haven't seen yet, which is routing in Angular. It's actually very straightforward. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that when I did my capstone project as a student, because we wanted to implement this. So router outlet basically just says this is a whole, like a placeholder for anything you're routing to. Whatever route you have linked to, it'll go here. So that you don't actually put the name of any particular component here. You just let the routing handle it. And then there's this file that is the configuration for that. And it's pretty great because you basically just list a new object here for each route that you want to have. And you just say, this is the route name, and this is the component that you should display when someone goes to that route. And then you can also have, redirects if you want to. So in this case, I've said if it goes to home or if it goes to something it doesn't know what it is, in both cases, just redirect to Artworks because I don't really have a home page right now. This is more of a proof of concept. So really the only two pages I've got are Artwork and Artworks with a specific ID number. So that's how that's done. And when you put these in, as you're typing it, it'll automatically import them up here, but otherwise you can type it in yourself. And then, later if you had, some other things you could, continue to add these, and you basically just add them in the order in which you want it to check. So which is why these things go last, because we always want, wildcards to go very, very last because we wanted to check all the valid routes first. So that's the basics of routing. It really is that simple. And so then the links that I have in my files, you'll be able to see kind of where I've just used those routes, and so then it knows which component to load. So I've got a header, there's just this part up here, which was the only thing that was in that file other than the router. And then I've got a couple classes in here, and these classes pretty much mirror the classes that are on the back end. It's a good way to go if you've already got your data structured nicely for how you want to use it. And so I, set up an artwork and a style and an artist and artwork details class so that I could structure the data the same way. And then here I just have a card. So every single one of these that you see here is an instance of that artwork card component. There's multiple instances and they each have, unique information. And I've just looped through and said, give me a whole bunch of these components with, different information for each artwork. The artwork details is that actual page that has that route associated with it. And then similarly, this artworks page is this page that has the full gallery of all of the pieces. So, the HTML for this page is pretty simple actually, because I just use an ng4 to loop through the artworks and then just display it. And there's where I've got that, attribute directive with the artworks here to actually show that routing. And then I'm just adding, concatenating on that artwork ID, whichever one it is. So each of these, when I click on them, will, as a link, will go to the page for that particular artwork. And then I just show the card, pass in the artwork through here so that it'll, and you remember this from your graded assignment 6 when you did the satellites, you remember that? So over in the artwork details page, I've got that, oh, no, sorry, that would be the card. I got to show you the card. Hold on. Yeah, I've got that input annotation here on the artwork to show that it's coming in from another component. It's being supplied by the parent component. And I just had to, kind of have a fake one in place in order for it to replace it. Okay, so with that, and I think I lost it because I've gotten used to IntelliJ where once you open it, it stays open. Where was I? Oh yeah, that's it. That's all there is to this. I just looped through them and said display all these, and I'm using a little bit of classes to style them. You'll also see that the entire thing has the ngf directive that basically says if the images, because I'm controlling this here, I've got this is loading that's set to true because we're still loading it until the data has actually, because remember, these requests are asynchronous, right? Especially if they're on 2 different systems. So I actually fetch the artworks as soon as the component is trying to load. And then it calls this function, asynchronous function, and I'm using async await syntax instead of the older like .then, remember that? To say, let's get a response, go and fetch it from localhost 8080/API/artworks. It's a get method. Here's the headers. It's type JSON. And I've got this, cores thing that says, identifies this is who I am. Please allow me to get this data. And then once I have that response, I can pull the JSON out of it and set that to the payload, which is an array of artworks. And I've got a console log here so we can actually see it. So let me show you what that looks like. We go over to the console. Let me reload it. There we go. You can actually see all the data right here. This is a really handy thing when you're developing to be able to see all the data that comes in and what all the properties are. So every single one of these, because of I've done this, I can kind of see what all the data is, but I have unpacked it and set all of these objects, and eventually set the artwork object with all of its various parts, and then pushed it into the array, this .artworks that I set up here. And that is the array that then is being, looped over in the template. Gotta get my words. Okay. And I'm also sorting it before this finishes. And then I said, this is loading to false. I'm saying, okay, we waited until we got this response in both cases, and we have it now. We're confident we have it. Now we can say it's false. And then that means that this will actually show. Now, it all happens in a split second. But if you ever had a little bit of a delay, and that can happen, the page will just stay blank in this case until it won't try to create an error because it can't find any data in here. So that's a pretty good strategy to use when you're fetching data from another resource. Okay, the details component, this is the page where we have just, single information. So, it displays stuff about just one artwork. So in this case, I chose to actually do a separate fetch using the ID. So I'm calling the API/artworks/ and then concatenating on that ID. And that's going to hit the second handler that we have, this one, get artwork by ID, because I'm providing that path parameter. But otherwise, it's get, we want JSON, this is who we are. So all of that stuff is the same with the headers. And then I receive it, I set everything into the artist, and set everything in, get the list of styles, set everything into the details, and then put it all together in a new artwork object. And then I set it false so that the page can load, and then the page loads. And I just have, you can see I'm using some Bootstrap here with the containers and rows and columns to set this up nicely. But I've got the image on the left, and then I've got the list of all the stuff. I'm using a bunch of ngIfs for data that might not be there, so that if it's not there, it doesn't even display the entire thing, including the header. This is real basic, normal stuff. I've done this, and I've done this with Svelte. I've done this with React in the workplace. So yeah, this kind of setup is pretty normal. And then we have the card itself, which, just has, that image and the title and the artist's name and the year it was created on it. As you saw, here, each one of those cards has that, layout, right? So that's pretty much it. And the main thing is just, making sure you've set up all of your data to where it corresponds in a way that you can get it set into TypeScript, objects of the TypeScript classes, and work with it how you need to. And sometimes that'll be an exact mirror, and sometimes it won't. It just depends on what you need. But this is how it's done. Localhost 8080 on the back, localhost 4200 on the front, and you just make the fetch and work with the data and knock yourself out. And if I was really going to go gangbusters on this, I'd have a pretty cool interactive app, because Angular is awesome for dynamic, UIs. Because the difference here is that every time I'm loading something, or I'm like, let's say I had other stuff going on, some of these pages, I wouldn't be having to make like a contact us page if I was switching to the contact us page, which doesn't require any sort of a call to get new data from the back end. I wouldn't be making a call, and running things through a controller every single time, because that's all handled on the front in the Angular app. But with your MVC app, all your time leaf templates, every single route is running through one of those handlers to determine what comes next. So it's a different approach, but a very common one. And I wanted to give you a chance to see that before you head into liftoff. Any questions? No questions. Mina.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit on bridging the Angular and Spring backend?
Well, it's all through this fetch here that fetches from localhost 8080 and uses that endpoint API/artworks. And that's defined by this API controller right here. This is the endpoint. And then this is the get mapping, for that. So this is the handler that'll run, and it'll go and get the artworks and then send them back. And then when that arrives here, we can, translate it to JSON, and then we have, in this case, this is the one that's for the specific artwork. So that's actually the other handler. But yeah, if we were in, not that one, this one, this is the one that receives all of them. Yeah. And so, we get those back and, get it out of the JSON, have the payload, and then we can, this for each is a higher order function that's commonly used for looping. Otherwise, you could set up a a for loop if you wanted to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Kerry.
Adam?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, obviously in the real world, you won't be using local hosts. So how would that look out in the real world? Like, would you deploy two different websites, and one of them the user would never go to, and that'd be the back end, and one of them would be a front end? So how exactly does that look?
Backend doesn't have to have a view. You can have a backend that has no templates and has nothing. Its only purpose is to be an API, and so the only controllers you have are API controllers.
So how would you create that, I guess is what I'm asking.
You would do it just like this, except you don't need any of the controllers that send to templates. You don't need any of the templates. And you may or may not need, depending on how you have authentication set up, you probably have a few different things here. But you would still want your, your classes and all that kind of thing, because that you have to have the entities that, help Hibernate know what tables to create for the database and that sort of thing. So just be that your only controllers would be this type of controller. They'd be REST controllers, and they'd be setting, endpoints for an API, as opposed to just something that's internal to this app, where you have routes that correspond directly with sending, templates that you're returning.
Gotcha. So there wouldn't be a view, but you'd still be able to fetch from that.
Yeah.
That URL.
Yeah. And
Gotcha.
actually,
Okay.
it's very normal. I mean, this is an unusual situation. I'm using, the same back application to do two different things.
Right.
I've got, this basically it's, this one is the admin, portal, and this one is the public website. But they're running out of the same backend app.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? No.
Hey, Carrie, this is Zach.
Yeah.
Was Adam talking about like deployment, the deployment of the back end and the front end, or?
Adam, did I answer the question you actually asked, or were you asking something different?
Yeah. I was wondering, I mean, when you deploy them, and it would create two separate websites, and then one is the view, and then one is the back end, and then you fetch from it. But you did answer it.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, deployed, neither of them would have localhost addresses. Absolutely.
Right. So that's what I was asking. Like in the real world, when you deploy them, how exactly that would look. Yeah.
No, you can absolutely have resources with, these endpoints that don't correspond to, any sort of UI at all. They're purely for retrieving data from a database.
Gotcha.
That's very common. It's mostly common, I would say. Okay. Mina, you have another question?
Carrie, do you have any small example in your portal, like a demo, small, like doing a project or some sort of kind of that thing? For practice, or for example, or for trying out? Like that.
I sort of. So I have, if I think, So you're saying like if I had something else that you could practice with?
Yeah. Initially in JavaScript, you have some links, right?
Yes,
For
yes.
practicing and all.
So I taught liftoff like a year ago. And there's, and I think it's in class 2, there's where you talk about user stories. I did a little demo to show how you can have a backend Spring Boot, project and a front end Angular project, and actually have them in the same repository so that you make them all work together. And how to do all that. And the video is on my YouTube channel. I can put the link to it. There's going to be some references to that thing we talked about in class that you guys won't know about because I was talking to the students in that class at that time. But for the most part, I think you'll be able to catch on, and it will give you, another breakdown of kind of how all this works in a very, very simple way. And also I'll drop that link into the lecture questions channel when we get done.
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? Okay. Well, you guys, don't forget, you can view all of this beautiful art by going to the link that I had in the slides that links to the Google folder, on Google Drive, where I have all these. You can go and look at them, and the names have, the name of the artist and the title of the thing. So you can always go check that out. Mina, did you have another question, or is your hand just still up?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so if that's it, then for studio tonight, yeah, Thursday is the last day to qualify for Unit 3. So you got to knock your assignments out. You can meet with a TA to demo projects if you're ready. And if you haven't completed that survey yet, tonight's a good time to do it. Try to do it before the end of class. That will make Colin very happy. And then, yeah, Thursday's it, guys. This is my last lecture with you. So I just want to say I have been absolutely privileged to be with you guys. You've been a great group of students, and I have thoroughly enjoyed both teaching and learning in order to teach all of these things. And I'm sad that I'm not going to continue with you, even though I'm excited about the next cohort. Ben, you got a question?
Carrie, can you put your contact info in the general channel for us so we can stay in touch if we choose?
Yeah. I'll put my my link to my LinkedIn profile, and you guys can link up with me there. That'll be the best way to do it. That's kind of how I've kept track with most students in the past.
Carrie, will you be there virtually in 7th?
Oh, the event. I probably will come in person.
Oh, you'll be there. Oh, okay.
There's a small chance I'm going out of town, but if I'm not, I'll be there. Yeah.
It's another reason we'll have an opportunity to say goodbye then.
Yeah, it'd be nice to meet some of you guys in person. It's so funny. Like I was down there, last week for filling in for another instructor for Women Plus, and it was just so crazy. Like actually, like I met so many people that I've known for a long time, but we've never met in person because for 3 years we've been doing it all virtually. So yeah, it'll be good. All right. Well, if there is nothing else, I'm going to, I will get this recording and the slides up for you guys soon. And I'll drop all those links I talked about in the lecture questions channel. And definitely reach out to me. If you've got any other questions within reason, if I can, I'll answer them. At this point, your TAs are the people you're leaning on to, kind of help you get to the finish line here. And I said this before, but the sooner you get your stuff turned in, the happier you will make them, so that they're not grading like mad people at the last second. All right. You guys have a great weekend, and hopefully I will see you on the 7th.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Very much, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Scary.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.